Hi everyone! Thanks for joining us here at the Aquarium of the Pacific. Today we're going to be doing another one of our Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Sergio. I'm part of the education team here at the Aquarium. And today we're going to be talking about a really interesting topic. If you are watching from really anywhere in California, but especially Southern California, then today is going to be especially interesting, I hope, because we're going to be talking about what's going on in our own backyard. So right now I am in Long Beach. I grew up in Southern California, though, my whole life. So these topics are really interesting to me and really important. You'll see the connections, and hopefully the next time you go out to the beach out here, you're able to see these things for yourself. But as we are on our adventure today here, I want to point out that we can actually communicate live. So this is going on live in our studio here at the aquarium right now. And if something comes to mind that you want to share, we're going to be doing a lot of observations. So if you have an answer to one of my questions, or if you have questions for me that you want answered, you can just text us at that number down below, 562-286-1838. Now that's if you're watching live. If you are watching this video at a later time, so a day other than today, October 10th, I believe, at 10 o'clock, then you can still send us questions that we can hopefully respond to and give you the best answer possible. But that is going to be over email. So that email that you see below, the live@lbaop.org. So those will stay up there throughout the duration of our adventure today. So if at any point you want to respond or ask any questions, again, just follow those numbers or the email. Perfect. So today, what we're going to be talking about, you might have already been able to tell based on what's going on behind me. This is our blue cavern exhibit here at the aquarium. And it really illustrates in an amazing way the wonders of the environment that we're going to look at. Remember, I said earlier that this is our own backyard here in Southern California. This over here, Blue Cavern, is modeled after a kelp forest. A very specific one, actually. It's Blue Cavern is the same name of an area right off of the Catalina Island. Yeah, so I'm going to step off here in a second because I want to just, before, over talking or anything, I want to let you guys have an opportunity to make observations of your own. So I'm going to step off to the side. I'm going to be kind of quiet, and I just want you guys to really take a close look. I want you to use the full screen, really look from the bottom to the top of that screen, what's going on in this environment. You can notice the animals, notice the kelp. If you don't know exactly what kelp is, then maybe think about what kelp might be. I will say it is in this image or in this video, so you can find it there. But also see how animals are interacting with it, with the environment. So I'm going to step off and give you guys a few seconds to do that, okay? And remember, if you have questions during this or if you want to make notes of your observations, you can message them down in that number. So let's see. Just thinking about what I notice going on here, of course we have a lot of different kinds of animals, right? Take note about, are all of these animals the same? So are they the same species from what you can tell? Do they look the same? Are they the same size? Are some bigger than others? How do you think they would be interacting in this environment if they're different? Ooh. See one of my favorite animals from the aquarium here that just swam down back there. And then you might notice those, what's the best way to describe it? Those structures, right? They kind of look like underwater trees almost. What are those? And what impact might they have on this environment? Do they have any impact? How are the animals interacting with it? So remember, if you have any questions or you want to respond to any of the ideas going on, you can just message that number there below, 562-286-1838. Oh, I hear someone say it. Someone messaged in that they see fish swimming through kelp. Sorry, too many S's there. Yes, absolutely. So you're seeing those animals interact with that kelp, right? So someone, it sounds like whoever messaged in, that they recognize that those tall structures that look kind of green in this light, a little yellowish, but those tall structures, that is the kelp. So remember, today we're going to be talking about kelp forest. Ooh, that's a nice view of that fish there. We're going to be talking about this kelp forest. So we're not just focused on the kelp itself. That will be a big focus of the day, but we're thinking about a kelp forest. So I'm going to come back onto camera here a little bit. I want you guys to think, when we talk about forest, are we just talking about trees? Are we talking just about animals? No, right? When we talk about a forest, that kind of represents everything that's in that environment. A forest is an environment, and so that includes the plant life that we find there, right? The first thing that kind of comes to mind to me is like the rainforest. If we're talking about the rainforest, we talk about all of the different trees in it, right? We talk about the different animals in it. And all of those things are all interconnected, right? So they interact with each other, and no one thing happens on its own. The things that certain animals, the way that animals are eating or interacting with their habitat, so with the trees as a source of maybe shelter, those things are all connected to each other, right? We can think about bigger ideas like maybe a food chain or a food web. If you've heard about that, we'll talk about it a little bit later as we get into the animals that call these kelp forests home. But I just want you to start thinking of these kelp forests as not just the plant itself, but really the entire ecosystem or community that is built around this kelp. So this blue cavern, the life that we have going on here, is a really great representation of that, because you can really see, and here's a key word, you can really see the biodiversity that happens in a kelp forest. Now, what does that mean, biodiversity? I'll give you guys a second there to think about it, and if anybody wants to send in their answer to that. Okay, biodiversity. You could break it up. When you think of bio, what does that mean? The other half, diversity. What does it mean to be diverse? Let's see. Anyone have any answers for me? Let's see. So if you're thinking, let's keep working with that with the word kind of broken apart. So if you're thinking bio means life, you'd be right there. So think about biology, right? The study of life. So bio being life, and diversity meaning lots of or many different kinds of, right? So biodiversity means there's a lot of different kinds of life happening in a place. Oh, this is a great view of our fish there. So biodiversity, so kelp forests are a very biodiverse ecosystem. They kind of create a space for many different kinds of animals to exist in this habitat. And we can really see that, right? So when I asked you to make observations about this kelp forest, I asked you to look at the different kinds of fish, the sizes in them, the different kinds of species. And in fact, I'm going to step off a little bit here while I talk about it so I don't cover them up. But you can see there's many different shapes of fish, and I will point out that this is here at the aquarium, right? So we've kind of carefully curated which animals are in here, and this doesn't represent all of the animals that would be in a kelp forest out in like the real blue cavern out by Catalina. But even just looking at this, you can see a lot of different kinds of fish. Earlier when I said one of my favorites was swimming by, I was pointing out that leopard shark that we kind of got a bottom view from. We have some blacksmiths. We have, you can see right over there in the background. I'm going to come over here real quick. But you can see over there in the background, right there, we're starting to get a pretty good view of our giant sea bass. And that's one of those key animals here that we love to show off in our blue cavern exhibit. But that giant sea bass, they are huge animals. They're a huge fish. There you go. I'm going to step off, but you can see this one right here. There's another one of them. We have 3 in there, I believe. But that giant sea bass, that's one of those key species here in our kelp forest. Okay. In here, I believe we also have our sheep's head. I don't know if I see one in here. But other animals that you might find in a kelp forest include some of the ones that we're going to be talking about a little bit later, but things like the furry, adorable sea otter, animals like sea urchins, sea stars, so think things that would be much lower, kind of hanging out on those rocks right there, so like on these layers down there. We also have our mammal friends that would be in this environment, like our seals and sea lions. And again, if you're a native or used to, oh, here's an awesome video. This is what this would look like. So you can see the kelp is going on. You see the kelp. It shoots straight up, much like our kelp forest that we have here. This is our seals and our sea lions. So these are California sea lions. Again, if you're a native or if you've just spent a lot of time here in the Southern California coast, then you're probably used to hearing these guys or seeing them out on those buoys, right, out in the ocean. Oh, they're awesome. That's amazing. Oh, and here's a great view of this kelp forest. And now, this is an amazing view too, because this one really shows off that the way that the kelp forest kind of creates a larger habitat. So we start to see these kinds of layers, right? So there's this top layer here, and the way the light shines through, it creates different sorts of perspectives and different layers where then you get in the middle and it's a little bit more open, right? And then you get down below and you don't see that as much here. But these layers, they actually kind of are the same as that rainforest that we were talking about earlier, right? So I compared the kelp forest to a rainforest. Well, rainforests have multiple layers, and in those layers, because the trees are so tall, in those layers, different animals can call those different areas home. And so by understanding the different parts of the kelp, we can also have a deeper conversation about what those different parts, how they contribute to the ecosystem of a kelp forest as a whole. So I'm actually going to have us go over to our document camera over here. I'm going to step off camera. And I want you to take a look at what's here, because we're going to start talking about kelp itself. So taking a step back kind of from the entire kelp forest, and just thinking about kelp itself so that we can understand it a little bit better. Now, this is a part of a kelp. It's a part of kelp, a very specific part. You can start to make some observations if you want to send into the chat there what part you think it might be or what you think it might do. Now, while you make that observation, I do want to also raise the question, and you can also answer this one in the chat there, but what is kelp? Is kelp a plant? Is kelp an animal? What do you think? Well, to that, roots. Oh, somebody typed in and said roots. All right, that is awesome. Okay, so I'm going to step into the camera here while we have a little bit of a conversation. So somebody said that they are the roots. So if we are observing them thinking that they might be the roots of the kelp, then that tells me that we might be thinking that kelp is a plant. That makes sense, right? Back at Blue Cavern and the other videos of the kelp forest, and I mean even just talking about kelp, right? I've been comparing them to trees in a forest. They look like plants. They have a lot of those similar parts to them, but kelp actually technically isn't a plant. It does a lot of the same things, but kelp is actually considered an algae, okay? An algae. So now algae is technically different from plants. A lot of the time, we can see algae like it usually grows if you have a fish tank. It's those kinds of the things that make that kind of furriness on those rocks if you don't clean them too often, or in a pool if you haven't cleaned the pool in a long time. But that algae, now kelp is the largest kind of algae. It can grow, you saw how tall they can get. Kelp on an average day, kelp can grow up to 2 feet a day. Isn't that crazy? It grows massively, and it can grow, and you can see it grows really tall, right? It grows from that bottom, that sandy bottom, all the way up to the top. So now, going back to the doc cam here, like I said, kelp is technically an algae, not necessarily a plant, and what you call roots, that's actually an important reason of why we don't consider it a plant. Because these are not technically roots. You're very, very close, though. This is kind of the closest thing to roots that a that kelp would have. This is what we call a holdfast. So it's made up of a lot of kinds of kind of like viney pieces of the kelp, which is why it looks a lot like roots. So they are made essentially of the same structure of roots in a normal plant. But if we think about the job of a plant, oh, here's a great image here. That's our California sheep's head right there. And then this is the holdfast. So the one that we showed you, that's the dried up version, but that's what it looks like fully active. And actually in here you can really see the difference. So if we think about the job of roots on a plant, right, like a tree, the job of those are to be buried under the soil, and it soaks up nutrients, right? Kind of like a straw. It soaks up the water and all the minerals and nutrients under the ocean, or under the soil, sorry, and pulls that up and gives it to the rest of the plant. Now, as you can see, step on camera here, as you can see over here on our holdfast, it's not under the sand or soil, right? It's on the top. And actually, so why we call it a holdfast is it really is like the anchor of kelp. It wraps around like a rocky substrate or just any sort of like hard places on the ocean floor, and it just keeps it anchored there. It also doesn't absorb any nutrients, so it's not working like roots on a normal plant. Their job is to basically just keep them held down. And then you can see the rest of the structure here. Now, you see it go all the way up. If we go back to the document camera, I can give us a closer look. Now, the one thing I'm going to show you here, this is artificial kelp, so it's not real kelp, but it is modeled just like it. So I'll show you a little blade here. So another thing is you might have noticed all of those kinds of arrowhead shapes on the kelp there, right? That would be this part here. Now, a lot of people think of it as a leaf, right? It's kind of the closest thing, but this is another key difference of why kelp isn't quite a plant. This is not quite a leaf. We call this a blade. Yeah, so this is the blade. And you can kind of see, especially with the light refracting on it like this, you can see the texture of it. Now, if you were to hold a real piece of kelp, maybe you found some out on the beach, but that kelp is kind of, kind of bumpy. Its texture is a little wavy, right? And so that texture that's actually pretty important, because since the holdfast, since those don't absorb nutrients like the roots of a regular plant would, it's actually the blades of the kelp that absorbs those nutrients. So having all of those wrinkles in it actually helps water kind of pass along its surface more, and that actually helps it absorb more nutrients, which is pretty cool. Right at the end of them, we also have this kind of bubble. And that bubble is what we call an air bladder. Yeah, kind of funny. But an air bladder, it's basically this, it really is just a bubble. Maybe, I know for me, when I find washed up kelp on the beach, one of my favorite things was when I was younger was to just kind of grab them and pop them, because they're hollow inside. They are pretty much just filled with air, and they actually kind of work like a balloon. And that's what helps kelp stand nice and tall. So that's what keeps that kelp going from the bottom all the way straight up, is the little pockets of air that keep it floating upwards instead of just floating down. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. So I'll put that aside there, and maybe we can get that photo of the kelp back on our screen. Oh, and let's stick with this one actually. So this is a great one here where you can see that bladder right there on a real piece of kelp. The blade right there, you see those wrinkles. And then what do we have over here? Do you guys know what animal this is? Ooh, this is one of our sea urchins. Great. So now I want to talk about, I think we've talked a good deal about what a kelp forest does for its community, right? It gives a lot of places. So we saw from the bottom, there where the holdfast is, to the very top, it creates layers. And it gives animals a lot of places to hide. That's one of the main things that it does. So that's why earlier we saw those fish swimming in between the kelp. And in fact, like those giant sea bass that we saw, they had a bunch of spots on them. I don't know if you were able to see them on there, but if you ever find a photo or if you come to the aquarium, you'll see those spots on there. Awesome. I'll step aside right here. Yeah, right there. So all of those spots the animals, you'll find that a lot. Our leopard sharks, who also live in this kelp forest that we're swimming around there, they also have different kinds of spots, but same idea. Now, that's a sign that these animals are adapted to this environment. It's a specific type of camouflage called disruptive camouflage. And it's actually playing off of the difference in color and lighting that the kelp forest creates. We saw in that one image how the light shines through the kelp forest and creates different spots of where some parts are a little lighter than others, some are darker than others. So these spots on these animals, you can think of it as doing the same. It's creating a light side. So like right here, you see that light whitish part of the bass, or of the giant sea bass, and then you see the darker spots. So when you put that behind a kelp, it blends into to that dark, light swaying kind of environment. Right there, we see that. Yeah, so these animals have evolved with their environment, with the kelp forest, to be able to survive in it the best. And you can see how the kelp forest itself has influenced these animals. Now, it doesn't just provide a place to hide for animals, it's also a source of food for other animals. But that actually kind of ties into the challenges that these environments are facing. So kelp forests, they do face a lot of challenges. So we can think about, like, we've compared this to the rainforest a lot, right? I'm sure you've heard about an issue called deforestation, where a lot of trees in the rainforest are being cut down. Kelp forests have their own challenges that they face. Now, one of the main challenges is actually the way that we as humans have disrupted the natural food chain and the interconnected web that is happening under the sea. One of the ways that we best see this is the way that hunting and overfishing has really affected these environments. When we think about hunting, I want to think about one specific animal. Like I said, our furry sea otters, right? So the sea otters, they are kind of a staple of the California coast. I know they're one of my favorites, but they're also critically endangered as well. And that's because when people were first really settling on the west coast over here on California, they really, really liked that sea otter fur, or its pelt. And so they would hunt the sea otters to try to collect that fur in order to make different kinds of clothes to keep them warm. And now at that time, we kind of overhunted those sea otters. And we didn't quite, let me step aside so you can see our furry friends here. Oh, look at that furry guy. Yeah. And so that fur is a really, really key part in keeping that sea otter warm and able to survive in the cold California water. But we also recognize that as maybe a good source for keeping us warm. But we went too far, right? So this is really all a conversation about balance, staying in balance with nature. And so when we overhunted these sea otters, we brought their population so low that they weren't able to do their job in their kelp forest environment, because sea otters are what we call a keystone species. Now, they actually help keep other populations of animals in check, specifically sea urchins. So if you think back to that photo we had of the kelp blade with the sea urchin on top of it, that urchin was there on purpose, that purple spiky ball. This one right here, exactly. Oh, right there, sorry. Exactly. That sea urchin, their favorite food is actually kelp. But because they usually live on the rocks towards the bottom of a kelp forest, the part of the kelp that they eat the most is actually the holdfast. And remember, I said that holdfast was the anchor of the plant. So when these sea urchins, they eat the holdfast, the kelp gets detached, and the air bladders that we talked about, those little balloons, get it to float up to the top, and then the waves push it onto shore. And that's usually when we see kelp washed up on shore, is because that holdfast has been either deteriorated or usually eaten by something. And now these sea urchins, when they get out of control, so when there's too many sea urchins, they can completely destroy a kelp forest because they eat all of the holdfast and they create what's called an urchin barren. Barren meaning an area that's just empty. And it only has urchins, basically. You'll just see these urchins covering all of the rocks on the ground. And all of that kelp has gone. And when all of that kelp is gone, then the home for all of the different fish that we talked about, that home is gone. Now, nature's own kind of way of preventing this is by having some species of animals that eat urchins naturally. Now, those otters are a specific one of those species. Yeah, exactly. That's why they're a keystone species, what we call them, because they are key to keeping those ecosystems healthy. And when too many of them disappear, then we get more and more sea urchins, which means more and more kelp disappears. Now, thinking about another big challenge, there's climate change, because kelp is really, really sensitive to temperatures of the water. And as the water gets warmer, there's less of a chance for kelp to grow as big as it usually does, or even if it gets too bad, at all. So those are kind of the two biggest challenges that kelp faces. And with our last little bit of time here, I do want to end on a bit of a brighter note by talking about what we can do as members of this earth, members of this community, in order to help keep these kelp forests healthy and thriving. One of the biggest things that we can do is helping to kind of fight back climate change, right? That's a big topic these days, and one of the best ways to do that is think about the carbon emissions that we're putting into the air. So think about things, oh, there's our giant sea bass, nice. Think about the ways that we get to where we're going. So instead of driving the car, use different modes of transportation, things like bikes or things that don't quite use as much or any gas that puts out carbon into the air. We can also think about carpooling. So when we do have to use gasoline-fueled cars, we can still carpool, take things like the bus, or just get in the car with friends and take that to your location. You can do that. On a kind of more scientific note, there's things that the aquarium is doing and that teams of scientists around the world are doing in order to help preserve some of those keystone species and help those animals recover. So like at the aquarium here, for example, those giant sea bass that we talked about, we didn't get too into depth with them, but they were actually also one of those animals that early on got very overhunted, and that disturbed the natural web in these kelp forests. And so we here are trying to raise new giant sea bass in order to reintroduce into the ocean. We actually had one of our sea bass born here at the aquarium. On a similar note, we also have our Monterey Bay Sea Otter Surrogacy Program at the Aquarium of the Pacific. Now, that is a similar program that we are doing with, oh, look at that otter, so cute. Yeah. So we are helping out the Monterey Bay Aquarium up north in order to raise sea otters kind of behind the scenes so that they never really interact with humans, so that they're able to actually go back into the ocean, and so we can raise those population numbers more than would be able to kind of naturally, because as some sea otters get stranded or separated from their mothers, and as an animal, they really rely on their mothers in order to teach them all that they need to know to survive. So if they don't have that, they usually aren't able to survive. But what we're doing with the Monterey Bay Aquarium is they have been bringing in sea otters that maybe have been stranded or separated from their mothers, and then they use the otters that they have there, as well as the otters that we have here, to teach them those skills, and then we're actually able to put them back out into the open ocean so that they can go and be members of those kelp forests, right? So help keeping those urchin populations in check. Now, the last thing that you guys can do, that everyone can do, my favorite thing, is really just continuing to be a lifelong learner, continuing to support organizations and places that have similar missions to ours, to the aquarium, that is all about conserving the animals out in our natural world. Now, just by watching our stream today, you've been doing a really important part. You've educated yourselves, and you've also contributed by helping our organization get our word out. So just doing that simple action goes a really, really, really long way. So just remember that. Now, with that said, we've reached the end of our time here, so I just wanted to say thank you guys again so much for joining us. Thank you guys for spending these 30 minutes learning with us, and if you're watching in the future, thanks again for finding us. Other than that, have a wonderful rest of your day.